right, Brittany, you feeling ready?
Yeah.
That enthusiasm. I'm filled with confidence. All right, we're going to get started then. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this ArchivesSpace application overview workshop. I hope you are in the right place. I'm Jessica Crouch, the Community Engagement Coordinator for ArchivesSpace, and I'm joined today by your workshop instructor, Brittany Newberry of the Atlanta University Center. In advance of the training, you all received an email with an agenda for the workshop. In that agenda were links to all of the materials that you'll need to participate in this workshop. The materials are for participants of the live workshop only, so if you are listening to a recording of this in the future, this does not apply. The workshop materials include a handy workbook for your use. We're going to be moving really rapidly through this workshop, and we will not be covering most of what you see in that workshop. So don't expect to follow along page by page, and we don't expect you to have printed it out or have it somewhere like that. But it's very useful, and I hope that you save it and use it for your future use. There's also a test instance of ArchivesSpace in that Google folder. Find your name on the workshop machine assignment spreadsheet in the drive and copy and paste the link next to your name into your browser for your own personal test instance of ArchivesSpace. You can log in using the username and password provided on the spreadsheet. It's admin, and then the test instance will be available to you through April 2nd. So please use that to do whatever you need to do as you explore ArchivesSpace. Once these test instances are no longer available, you can always use our sandbox that we keep up all the time for practice. And finally, there's just some additional test data and documents in there that may help you as you explore what you learned in the workshop in the coming days. In addition to these resources, we've also provided you with a list of links at the bottom of your agenda that are resources about using ArchivesSpace and ArchivesSpace membership that you may find useful. Included there is also a workshop evaluation. We hope that you do complete that at the end of the training. We are using Zoom webinar for this workshop, and your microphone and camera are both muted. If you'd like to ask questions of the trainer, we ask that you use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. If you have a general question or need some other form of assistance, please feel free to reach out in the chat. Questions that you ask about the training will be read and answered during the allocated time for Q&A. Some questions may be answered directly in the chat in an effort to keep training on schedule, so keep an eye on that for additional information and resources. You also have the ability to turn on closed captioning at the bottom of your screen. You can elect to either show or hide subtitles by selecting live transcript at the bottom of your screen and pressing the little up arrow there. You can also elect to view the full transcript either in tandem with subtitles or in lieu of subtitles by selecting that option. If you need technical assistance during the workshop or need to alert me to something, please feel free to chat me privately, Jessica Crouch, and we can talk. We are going to be using the latest version of ArchivesSpace for this training, which is version 2.8.1. If you're currently using an earlier version of ArchivesSpace, keep in mind that some of the features you see today may not be available to you. We also won't be able to troubleshoot issues with your own implementations of ArchivesSpace, but if you have questions or an issue with the implementation of ArchivesSpace that you use at home, please email us at archivespacehome@lyrasis.org. And as I said, your instructor today is Brittany Newberry of the Atlanta University Center. I'm going to allow Brittany to introduce herself, but let me say you could not ask for a better trainer to cover this topic, so I'm very excited. Brittany, take it away.
Put a lot of pressure on me. Hi, everyone. I'm Brittany Newberry. I'm a processing archivist at the Atlanta University Center in Atlanta, Georgia. So as the processing archivist, I manage our use of ArchivesSpace in the archives. I train staff, volunteers, interns on how to use ArchivesSpace. I update our manuals, create workflows, and pretty much do anything besides some of the technical aspects of ArchivesSpace. For ArchivesSpace, I am the chair of the ArchivesSpace User Advisory Council, as well as an ArchivesSpace trainer. I've been doing so for over a year now. And I am involved in various other activities with ArchivesSpace. So I'm going to share my screen and we'll get started. So on the screen, you should be seeing the ArchivesSpace homepage. This is the sign-in page. As of probably version 2.8.0, this has been the new sign-in page. So you'll sign in with your username and password, which for the test instances is just admin. Make sure that's correct. Press sign in. Don't have it save it for you unless you want to save your passwords. And this is the home page for the ArchivesSpace staff interface. There is a public interface that comes with ArchivesSpace, and I will show that in a few moments briefly. So when you're on this page, there are several main zones of the application. The ArchivesSpace acts as a content management system. I will point out it is not a digital content management system. We won't be going over digital objects either, so, but there will be a workshop in June about digital objects. So from the screen, you can see there's very drop-down menu, the search bar. So over here is basically where you can manage your users and your repository. If you have multiple repositories, this is where you would select the repository from the list. So you can create and manage multiple repositories in one ArchivesSpace implementation. You don't have to have implementation for each. So if you have multiple special collections, you can do that in ArchivesSpace. From the system dropdown, you have the ability as a system admin to see the full list of this. This depends on your permissions in ArchivesSpace. So from here, you can manage the controlled values list, which is most of the dropdowns within ArchivesSpace. You can manage those lists, manage container profiles, which refer to the containers that house your material, your location profiles, which refers to the shelves, the drawers, those kind of things, the storage room that house your materials. Manage repositories, create and edit and do whatever you need to do with repository. There's manage users, which you can create and edit their permissions and groups that they are in. And then you can access the Help Center from here and from other locations. The Help Center is only available to ArchivesSpace members. So if you aren't a member, you aren't able to access it. From this screen, you see what user you are. Sorry. So I am admin, but you have the ability to become a different user within your implementation. So if you want to see what a regular archivist would see or what one of your interns would see as a user, you can do that and change who you are. From here, you can control your preferences, what types of columns show up in the browse. When you're browsing through the various records, you can create preferences both globally for the whole implementation, for your repository, or for you as a user. And from here, you can log out. I will say that ArchivesSpace will log you out after so long. That can be controlled, but if you are in ArchivesSpace and you leave to go to lunch or leave for the day, just save whatever you are doing because it will not save it for you. You have to save. The question marks will lead you to the Help Center, and you will see those throughout the application. So whenever you are see in a record or something, you see a question mark, you can click on it and go to the Help Center to learn more about that record, that sub-record, that field in ArchivesSpace. This is the repository that you are in. So when you've selected one, you will see this here. You can also already assign to a repository as a user because users are created within the repository. So whenever you sign in, you're already in the one that you've been assigned, or if yours can be in multiple as a system admin, you're usually just in the top one. So that's where that is, and you can click on it to see more information about this. It'll tell you that it's currently selected. It will give you the full name of the repository if it's published, which means if you can see that information about it on the public user interface, and the contact details if there are any, as well as the OAI harvest settings for this. Go back to home. When you click on the settings gear, you can see where you can manage groups. These are the permission groups. So you generally have like archivists, project managers, repository manager. You can manage user access, so the individual access that a person has. Manage your assessment attributes, which is something that we'll not go over, but there will be an assessment workshop in the future. You can manage top containers, which are the physical containers that are associated with your archival objects and other records. Do background job, create reports, and access the one out-of-the-box plugin that comes with ArchivesSpace, which is the LCNAF import, which we will not be going over. That is for importing agents and subject records from the Library of Congress authority files. So there's that. And then, of course, another question mark if you need to get to the Help Center. Over here is the home button. Click on this will just take you back to this page. You have the Browse menu, which is your ability to browse the records within each of these groups. So the top three are accessions, resources, and digital objects. Those are the main record types within ArchivesSpace, and they are independent of other repositories. So if you create an accession record within this repository, it will not appear in the other repository. Same for resources and digital objects. So if you want the same resource for some reason, if it's linked to multiple repositories, you would have to create that record in the other repository. The ones below that line can appear and will appear in other repositories. So you don't have to duplicate subjects, agents, locations, and other things. Those will appear and when you go to the browse menu or search through that another repository. From the create menu is where you can create these records. And then there is also the search bar, and this is where you can search throughout all records within this repository. And when you search, you can do advanced searches as well. You can do not statements, search by keyword, identifier, note, subject, what it contains in, and you can do multiple statements. You can do text, date, and a Boolean search as well. If you don't want to do multiple, you can delete them. So if you were to search, just gonna see what. I feel like this has changed. If you were to search, you will see the search results and you have the ability to view and edit records from the search results as well as the browse menu. So when you view a record, you will see it in the closed mode, so you won't be able to edit it until you click on edit. When you, which we'll go back to that, when you click on edit from the search or browse results, you are in edit mode and you are able to edit it and see everything associated with it, not just something that has text within it. As you scroll through a record, you will be able to scroll over various fields and see the tooltips that appear from them. These are configurable in the config file, but this just gives you information on what this field is for and what, if there's a DAX standard associated with it, which standard is associated with it. So you will see that as pretty much in every record, it will give you that information. So you're able to do that and configure them for your implementation. I want to go into resources. So when you're in the browse list, you have the ability to change how these are sorted by. So title, created, modified. You have the ability to select how that is. So created descending. You can do faceted searches. So searching by both title and creation. So you can do multiple things when you are doing this. You also can filter this by text. So you can type it here to limit your results. If you just want stuff in resources, you can search within these by filtering by text. You can search by subjects associated with them. And if they're published with resources, you have the ability to edit if you are the system admin or have this permission, you have the ability to edit default values. You can download the CSV, create a resource from this menu, and you have the ability when selecting to delete it as well. We won't do that. So when you are in a resource record, and we'll go over how to create these later, you have the ability to expand certain text fields if you need to, if there's a long text or something like that. If you are in notes and you add a note to this, choose this one, and you want to wrap text, do a tag, you have the ability to tag things with block quotes, dates. You can emphasize like doing italics and bold. You have the ability to do that in the notes field just by typing with that. If you are in a record and you have created more than 5 or more sub-records within it, it will tell you to please click to load that record. That's just a way for the system to not have to load things, every single thing in a resource or a record. So yeah, because some things you have a lot, you may have 50 subjects for some reason. So it's just a way to not have to do that immediately when opening the record. Okay, so I want to briefly show you guys the public user interface, but before I do so, I wanted to see if there were any questions about the staff interface overview.
I do see that there's a hand raised in the attendee section. So if you have a question, please feel free to type that into the Q&A option. We do have a question about seeing the public user interface, but obviously you're about to do that. So if there are any questions about the staff user interface or the application overview you just saw, please do type those into the Q&A box. So we do have a question. We're not going to get into agents today, but we do have a question. What is an agent, Brittany?
Oh. So agents are usually your names and corporate entities and families. So they refer to people and their authority, basically the people within your collections and the organizations within your collection. Agents give you ability to create a record for them so you can link them to your resources, your accession records, your digital objects, that kind of thing. So that way people can search for names of people and names of organizations, even software, and then the family names as well. If you visit the help center, or if you have access to that, even if you just go into the records themselves in your test instance, it will give you information on that. There is an update to agents coming out with the next version, so be on the lookout for that. I hope that explains agents.
Thanks, Brittany. Yeah, there's a lot of documentation about agents, and Dean, who asked the question, I know you are an ArchivesSpace member, so please do look at the documentation about agents in the Help Center. We did have a question. So whenever you move, right now, Brittany is in the staff user interface. When you move to the public user interface, Brittany, just could you do it slowly so that people can see how you're making the switch?
Yeah, I can do that.
Yeah, so then we do have some questions. So about subjects, are they user defined or Library of Congress subject heading or other? I can go ahead and answer that one, Brittany. Crystal, all of the above. You can include user defined field, user defined subject headings, or you can create Library of Congress subject headings or any other standard that you're using. You can elect via drop down to say what sort of subject heading they are. There is also out of the box within ArchivesSpace, there is a plugin, the LCNAF plugin, that allows you to import subjects and agents, so subjects and people or families directly from Library of Congress. So we're not going to go over subjects or headings today, but that is available out of the box, that plugin. All right. I'm going to answer some of these questions in the chat just to help us save time. But could you define what a resource is, Brittany?
Yes, well, we will be getting into those, but resource records refer to your collection finding aids. So they are the record you would create when creating a finding aid within ArchivesSpace. So when you're creating a record for your collection, and it can be a single item collection, it can be multi items, it can be super large. So it's just your collection record.
Yeah, we'll get into that later after our first break. But I think let's go ahead and move over to viewing the public user interface, Brittany, and I will make sure there's one more question in the chat, but I'm going to answer that. I'm going to type in an answer to that one.
Okay. So sorry for my fast movements, but so when accessing the public user interface from the staff interface, you will generally see at the bottom of any screen you're on in this interface, the view public interface. So that is where you would click on that and it will take you to the public interface. You will also see there's ability to visit the ArchivesSpace homepage, the version that you are in, and you can send feedback or report a problem from this bottom toolbar. So when you see the view public interface, you'll click on it. It will open up in the same screen the out of the box currently. If you haven't changed anything about it, it will open up this screen, which is just the out of the box ArchivesSpace public interface. So up here is where you could change it to put your name and logo, and you could change all of that. So there is ability to change some of these things, and you can do a lot more, but I won't get into that today. So this is the main page. From here, you have similar search bar as you would on the staff interface, but just more user friendly. They have the ability to search all records within the public user interface that you have checked publish on the staff side. And when we get into going over records, I'll show you where you would publish something. So they can search just collections, which are your resource records, or digital materials, which are those digital object records. They can search by keyword, title, subject, notes. I will say that most people search by keyword, and we recommend to our users to search it like a database using quotations and asterisks in order to limit / narrow their results. Keyword search searches everything. So if it's not a subject or not a name associated with it, but that name is somewhere in like a notes record in one of your collections, it will find it and pull it up. They can search based on year, and they can add as many advanced searches as they want. So they can do Boolean searches with and, or not, and they can change these and add dates and then remove them if they don't want to do advanced searches. Up here, you will see that there are various tabs that they can click on. Repositories refers to repositories for your implementation. So if you have multiple of those and they're published, they will appear here. Collections are those resource records, and they will appear when you click on this. It will be a browse list similar to when you click on resources. But as I said, just more user friendly, and they have the ability to filter these results when they're in there, change the sort, which for some people is usually relevance, but it depends on your configuration. You have additional filters such as the repository, subjects, names. And if you're doing a general search, there may even be the record type. Process materials refers to accessions, names refers to those agents, and then record groups refer to classifications, which we won't be going over, but is in your workbook. So if you have questions about any of these subject names and record groups and digital objects, that they are in the workbook. So I'll show you briefly what a collection looks like, and then we will get into accession records. So when you're in a collection, depending on how you have it set up, you will see various buttons over here. The citation button, which just is a citation for the material itself. Print button, which will print the whole finding aid. And staff only, which will take you to the staff interface for this record so you can edit it. You have the ability to see what type of record is, which is collection, the identifier, the repository it's in, and then just a name for it. You can search within it via the search collection. You can search by year. You can see the whole collection organization. So the collection title, the series and subseries and files associated with it. And you have the ability to click on these from here. You will see notes, dates, language, restrictions, all here, the extent, so the size of the collection, additional description, which this one has a lot, subjects, any other names would appear here as well, the finding aid administrative information, which we'll go over where that can be created when we do resource records, and then the repository details. So that is the collection overview. And then you also have the ability to see collection organization, which is just a scrolling finding aid of all the records in this collection. So it's everything that's here, just in scrolling form. Which today it does not want to scroll, but usually you would be able to scroll through that quite easily. And then container inventory, which is every container associated with the collection. And when you click on these, you're able to see all the files within that box, that folder, that kind of thing. So that is pretty much everything I'm going to show for the public user interface. And now I'm going to move back to staff interface, which you can do so down here, similar to how you would in the staff interface for the public interface. So we are now back in ArchivesSpace staff interface. So now I'm going to go over how to create an accession record in ArchivesSpace. So accession record.
Brittany.
Yes.
Okay, I know we're already behind time, but we did have one question that sort of related to the public user interface. So I wanted to go ahead and address that one. Some of the other questions in the chat, they will be addressed later on in this workshop. So I'm not going to ask them, but if you have an unprocessed collection, can you suppress that from public view?
Yeah, just don't press publish. So when we go over accessions, which are unprocessed materials on the public side, just don't check publish. So you don't have to suppress it. You just don't publish it. It depends on your institution if you want to publish them, because it does not publish all data that you create within that record, only certain fields. So I hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Brittany. So
speaking of unprocessed material, we're going to now talk about accession records, which refers to your acquisitions. So your new materials, even backlog materials that you have in your collections that just came in, and you want to create a record for that collection so you have information on it, you can do so in ArchivesSpace. And then you can, from there, start creating a resource record afterwards, and I'll show you how to do that. So those are referred to as accession records. So when doing so, you can create them from the create menu, or when you're in browse for accession records, you can create from that list as well. So from create, you will go to accession, and it will bring up a new accession record that is completely blank and has no information in it. So when you're creating an accession record, the only required field is identifier, which has to be unique to this accession record and different from all accession records within your repository. So if you have similar accession record numbers or identifiers for a different repository, it won't mess with this one, but it has to be unique for this repository. I recommend not just using identifier, but if you want to have a record created, you can just put the identifier in, save, and come back to it later. So for identifier, you have 4 fields to use here. You can use a mixture of numbers and letters, capitalized, lowercase, no symbols or unique symbols in this, just letters and numbers. So this would be The identifier you have associated with the collection when it comes in, you can create it now or before you have done this. So we're gonna create one now. You do not have to make it this long. Most people have shorter. I'm just making sure it doesn't conflict with anything else in this implementation. So we now have an identifier. So I recommend saving here. So you have the record created. And when you have saved, the identifier will now become the name for this accession record. And once you have a title, that will also become the name. So from here, we'll go over all the other potential fields you can create within an accession record. And then after that, I'll show you what this toolbar does. So in the basic information, you have the ability to add a title and various other things. Most things in accession records happen in the basic information, so I'll go through each of these. So for title, we're going to call this a Jane Doe Papers. You can add numbers, you can add, I believe, like quotations and stuff like that if necessary, but we're just going to keep it simple with Jane Doe Papers, referring to a manuscript collection. You have the ability to add an accession date. So that refers to when you got the acquisition, or refers to however your institution decides to determine what an accession date is. If you have questions about it, you can just scroll over and see what the tooltip recommends. So it's the date the accession took place. So it's not necessarily the same date as when you create this record. So if you got the accession months ago and just now creating the record, you can choose a different date, and you can choose in the future. Don't know why, but if you're creating this early for some reason, you can do that. So for content description, that refers to what's in the collection. So what topics, what document types you have, what's the format. It's a DAX standard that this refers to. So you can say that this collection contains correspondence, if I can spell today, diaries, research materials, and financial records from Jane Doe's life and career. And you can specify what kind of career, whatever you think is necessary for this field, you can put it here. This is one of the fields that will appear if you publish this record. So if you don't want a potential researcher seeing the information in this field, I recommend not putting it here and potentially putting in a general note further down. But you also don't have to publish this. If you want to expand it to add more, you can, so you can see everything in it. And then the next field is condition description. This refers to the condition of the materials, so the preservation concerns you may have, such as there are scrapbooks that appear fragile in this collection and may need further preservation, or it needs basic preservation, such as the removal of rusted staples and paper clips. So we could put correspondence is fragile and needs further preservation, have rusted staples and paper clips. When you are creating these records, it's really dependent on how your institution does accessions. If you have like a lot of information in these fields or just the bare minimum. For us, it's what we see when we get the collection and have rehoused it. So it won't cover everything. It will cover general and be pretty brief. So next one is disposition. This is when looking at the tooltips, is a note to describe how a particular accession may have been assigned to different resources. So you may have removed the photographs, you may have removed oversized items like posters and maps and created a different resource or collection for them. So if you know that has happened with this exception, you can put that here. Inventory refers to an inventory for the collection. If you created it and say box 1 has correspondence, box 2 has research materials, you can put that here. I will say that you have the ability to add external documents. So if you have created an inventory in a PDF or Word document, you can link the file to this record. So you can add the, what am I trying to say? The link or where it exists on your servers or in your file explorer, where that is, you can add that address. So if you do that, you can add in here that inventory is in separate Word document or file. So you can put that here, or you can type in the whole inventory if it's a very brief one in this field. So provenance refers to information about an accession, such as the custodial history, detailed acquisition information, who the donor is, the organization that donated, the person who donated, who that creator is. If it's an unofficial collection, who created this collection and stuff like that. We generally put the name of the person or organization that we got the records from. So we could say that this was Jane Doe donated the materials. It doesn't have to be a sentence, or it can just be a name. It really depends on you. Retention rule refers to the records management associated with this. So if you got this because of your university, transferring it to the archives because of the retention rule, you would put that here. So you would add a note about the schedule that it follows, that kind of thing. And then general note is for anything else. So if you don't want to put things in content description, or you want to add something that about the processing or the acquisition itself, you can do that here. If you want to say that you're expecting additions to this collection, you can do so in the general note, that kind of thing. So this is just a catch-all, and you can add pretty much anything to this note. So after that is the acquisition type. So is this a deposit? Is it from a donor who continually makes deposits, like a specific organization? Is it a gift, a purchase, a manuscript collection or a records collection that you purchased, or is it transfer from one of the other departments as a part of the retention rules? So you would choose that from this drop-down list. Again, it's not required, but it's just good information to know. You can also choose resource type, so collection. So is it our official collection that was brought together, but not by the person who actually created the materials? Is it a manuscript collection, so created by a person or family? So that would be papers. Is it just a lot of printed materials and magazines, journals, newspaper articles? So is it publication, or is it organizational and university records? So you would choose that from resource type, so in order to identify that. If there are restrictions to this collection, you would check restrictions apply. Here's where you would check if you want to publish this and put it under unprocessed material in the public user interface. Access restrictions refer to how people can access it. Is it open for research? Are they able to look at the materials and use them for their research? You can check this and then add an access restrictions note. And then the next one is use restrictions. So how are they able to, are there restrictions on the use of the materials? Are they able to photocopy them, ask for high-res scans, that kind of thing. So if you do have use restrictions, you can check that here and add a use restrictions note. I will say for my institution, we have an access restrictions note saying that the collection is processed, and if they would like to use it for research, they need to reach out to us. And because we don't just grant access, we need to know why. But for other collections, they're able to access them because they have been processed. So that kind of thing. So after you have gone through the basic information, which I said is fairly lengthy and covers most things associated with an accession record. You have the ability to add subfields. So when you're in a record, you will notice that there are similar subfields in the accession, the resource, and the digital object records. So those include dates, extents, subjects, external documents, collection management, instances. So I'll go over a good number of those today, but other ones are covered in your workbook. So with dates, you have the ability to add dates by clicking the Add Date button. You can add multiple dates. So if you want to add the bulk dates, like the majority of materials are found from 1900 to 1910, you can add a bulk date, inclusive date, a single date. So you have ability to add more than one date field to this. So when you're in date, you have the ability to choose a label. The default is creation, but you can choose copyright, event, modified, other, so you have this whole list to choose from. We're going to keep it as creation since it's an accession record. You have the ability to add an expression. This is not required unless you don't add, so if we say these are inclusive dates, if you don't add begin and end dates, you need to add an expression. So this is a conditional required field. And when you scroll over that, it explains what it is. So this follows back. So if we say we have inclusive dates and this falls from 1900 to 1950, we can put that here. And then we can also add the begin and end date. So you can add just the year and month, or the year, month, and day in these formats. So year, month, day, and numbers rather than so name. So not, you don't write the name May, the word May or other things. But in expression, you have the ability to write that stuff out. You have the ability to say these are circa dates by adding the word circa and other things like that. I'll make sure that you have the ability to add the certainty, the error, and the calendar, which none of these are required, but you can do so. If you want to add, you can click add here as well as up here. And if you have questions about dates, you can always click on the Help Center button. After dates, you can add extents. So this refers to the size of the collection. You can add an extent for the whole or part of the collection, and this portion of the collection is required. So if you want to separate out an extent for your digital materials from your physical, you can do that and say that this is part of it and add the number and the type of extent it is. So we're going to do whole and say this is 15 linear feet, but you have the ability to add cubic feet, gigabytes, megabytes, identify them as photographic prints, as cassettes. So this is one of the lists that you can edit, and it's fairly long, fairly covers most things that you will need for type of extent. So we're going to go with linear feet. So you'll see that this is the whole extent for the collection, and it's 15 linear feet. You have the ability to add a container summary, so you can say that there are 15 document boxes or Hollinger or Gaylord boxes and 2 oversized boxes. You can be as detailed as you want in this container summary or as brief as you want for it. You have the ability to add physical details about the boxes. So you can say that there are analog materials or you have negatives in one box, that kind of thing. And then you have the ability to add the dimensions of the boxes. So however many dimensions each box is or anything like that. I will say that when we get into resources, I'll go briefly over containers. So you don't have to necessarily add that information here. You have the ability, as I said, to add multiple extents and do parts and whole. You can do agent links, which we won't go over, but you have the ability to add an agent. So if you already create an agent, or if you want to create an agent, you can do that here and link them to this accession record. If you have a resource record that's associated with this, like it's part of the family of Jane Doe, or it's her husband, her brother, a organization she worked for, that kind of thing. You can add that in the related resources subrecord. You can also add related accessions in a similar vein. So family, organization, the additions. So if you have an accession for the additions to this collection, you can add that as a related accession. You can add subjects, so the topics of the collection, those index terms, you can add that here. You can add external documents. So for that inventory, you can say inventory of Jane Doe papers and add the location. So it's on File Explorer, or add the link address. So if you scroll over, it'll tell you, you can add that link pathway from your File Explorer, or add the PDF web address to it, but it is required if you do use this. And you have the ability to publish it, so the others can see where it's located if it's something that they can click on and open in another screen or something like that. So if it's a PDF, they can access. You can add write statements, instances, the accessions. So if you've removed items from this accession record and you want to note that, you can do so in the deaccession. We will be going over instances in resources, so we will get some information about those. Collection management field, so you can add the processing priority, like this has high priority or low priority. You can do that. If you've determined the rights, like we have the rights, or the creator has a right, you can add a processing plan for how you want to process it. You can add the names of the people who are processing it, the number of hours that you believe it will take to process it, the extent that needs to be done, the type of extent, and the total processing hours when it's done. If you got a grant to do so, you can add that here. And you can also add the processing status. So if this is an accession record for a collection that's partially processed, you can say that it's in progress, new, completed, that kind of thing. You can add classifications and add user-defined fields. So when you add user-defined fields, these are things you create as a part of the your implementation, and we won't be going over today, but I just want to show you that they are available to you. If there are fields that you want that aren't in this record, you can use user-defined fields to create those, and I would recommend going to the Help Center to learn more about those. And I will say, when you open up sub-records like external documents and subjects and stuff, those have their own required fields. So if you want to save this and you haven't entered information in the required field, it will not save it. So say if I delete number and click save, it will give me a red box and tell me what is the problem. So I don't have the number property. When you click on that, it will take you to where you need to correct the error so you can save the record. And when you have saved anything, it will give you, and it's saved and there's no errors, you will get this green box and tell you that it's been updated. So as I said, after you've created title, the name of the record gets replaced with the title rather than the identifier. And from there, you are done creating an accession record. And you're able to do a few things with this. You have the ability to add events, which we won't go over. I recommend checking those out on your own time. You can transfer this to a different repository. You can calculate extent, create assessment. If you have the ability to do so, you can suppress this from editing and being viewed on the public side. If you click publish and don't want to scroll down and unpublish it, suppress is probably better for resource records, which we'll go over in a minute, and you have the ability to delete. If you want to delete this, it will give you a box asking if you really want to do it, and then you can either choose to delete or cancel. We're not going to delete it. And then the other one is spawn. From an accession record, you have the ability to spawn another accession for additions. or related materials, or spawn a resource for the collection finding aid that you are creating for this collection. So we're going to spawn a resource, and then I'm going to take questions after this. And I think then we have a break. So when you spawn a new resource, it will tell you that it has been spawned. It will fill in certain fields. So the title, the resource type. The language will not be filled because that's not filled in Accession Records, but you will see that dates have been filled, extents have been filled. It will add in a related accession to the accession record it was spawned from. And it will add notes. So content description will become a scope and contents note, and condition description will become a physical description note. And those will be in this record, and you can edit them and change them to fit with the collection finding aid. And with that, I'm done with Accession Records, and we'll take questions before our break.
Thank you, Brittany. All right, so we have gotten a lot of questions in the chat. I did answer several of them just to keep things on time. And keep in mind, we can't troubleshoot your individual implementations of ArchivesSpace. So I have also linked to some resources in answers. So if I don't address your question directly, be sure to go and check the answered questions in the Q&A. But there are a few sort of general themes that I want to make sure we touch back on. So if you are creating an accession record and you would like to publish it, but there are certain parts of it, specifically donor information, that you don't want the public to see, what would you recommend, Brittany?
You can put donor information in the general note. Also, generally it just publishes the condition description, content description, provenance, any restriction notes, and the title and identifier. There may be a few other fields, but if you put anything in general note, it won't appear on the public user interface.
And so that was the general note, correct? That will not publish? Yes. Okay, yeah. Yes. And all right, I'm just going through, right. And I think you just covered what elements display is published if selected. So, all right. All right, so if you pull out some materials from your collection and if you pull out materials to another collection, can you link that collection somehow in your accession record?
Yes. So they're in another collection and you have a record of them in ArchivesSpace, you can use the related resource or related accession sub records of the accession record, which I'll just go back into accession. So if you scroll down and go to related resources or accessions, you can do that here. If there are no records created for them, you can add information about them in the notes up here. So you can do in general note or in any one that you think applies.
All right. Another question was related to the external documents. It was originally asked before you went over external documents, asking, can inventories be attached? And you can do that via external documents, but I just wanted to point out that if you do use an external document, like you have a Word inventory or PDF inventory and you link that, it will link, but it isn't searchable within ArchivesSpace. So that document will be there, but if you're doing some sort of search on the staff or public user interface, that document, the content of that document will not show up in the search. Just want to point that out. Yeah. For when you create an identifier, someone asked, do those numbers appear automatically?
Identifier?
Mm-hmm.
You have to create them for each record. I think that's what they're asking.
Yeah, they need to be created for each record. And depending on your own institutional policy or practice, you may use one of those 4 fields, or you may use all 4 of them.
Yeah.
Does the accession record become the finding aid, or are they separate documents in ArchivesSpace?
They are separate records. So if you spawn a resource record / finding aid from an accession record, you are creating another record. So you will be able to find both in your repository.
Thanks. In what fields do you write the copyrights?
Copyrights is a part of right statements in this record. And then in resource records, you have the ability to add a condition governing use and access notes. Here you can also add them to your access restrictions and use restrictions. Right statements is and rights is a separate workshop offered by the trainer core. So if we ever have one of those, please attend if you want to know more.
Another question asking about non-Roman language. Can you enter non-Roman language in any field? I would say yes with an asterisk. I would say give it a try, but it should work. Right now, out of the box, ArchivesSpace can be translated into English, French, Spanish, and Japanese. But you should be able to input any text that you like, but try it.
Yeah, I'm not certain.
Yeah. So someone else is asking, and we're at break time, so I'll answer this one, Brittany, and then you chime in if there's something else that you want to say, and then we'll go ahead and take a break. So someone says, do you spawn records to create item level records within a collection? No, spawning is specifically for creating an accession record and resource record sorts of relationships. It's that high level collection level material descriptive record that you would be spawning. If you are looking to create archival objects, so item level things, and you maybe have like 10 item level things and you really just need to plug them in, you would do that via the rapid data entry tool, or maybe the load via spreadsheet tool within ArchivesSpace. Again, I don't think you're going to go over those today, Brittany.
Yeah.
Correct. Okay, but
we're going over rapid data entry.
Okay, oh, we are? Okay, cool. So probably, Amy, the rapid data entry tool would be more what you are looking for.
Yeah. Yeah, we're going over those later in the day.
All right. Okay, so we are 1 minute past, so we're going to go ahead and take a 15-minute break. If there are any other questions that pop up in the Q&A in that time, I'm going to answer them by typing in an answer. And then we are going to come back at 15 minutes after the hour to start talking about creating resource records. So we're going to go ahead and take a break.
So now we are going to discuss resource records, which to go over again, resource records refer to the records we create for the collections when you're creating finding aids for them. They can be for single items, or they can be for large collections. You can create multiple resource records for one if you want to break it down into their series and stuff like that. So these are just what people would use to refer to their collections and the finding aids they're creating for them. So when creating a resource record, you can create it one of three ways. So as I've shown you, you can spawn it from an accession record. You can create it from the create menu, or when you are in the browse resources, there is a create resource button at the top of the results. So those are the ways you can create a resource record. So we're going to create it from this create menu just by clicking on resource here. When you do so, a blank resource record will appear that just says new resource. Similar to accession records, this record has required fields. Unlike accession records, it has multiple required fields and subrecords. So any that are required will already be open and have the red asterisks to indicate what is required in that subrecord of the record. So on the side, you will see that there's a 1 next to language, dates, and extents. That means that those subrecords are open and need to be filled. So we will start with the title. So resources can be for organizational records, artificial collections, manuscript, papers. So we're just going to continue on the theme of Jane Doe and create her resource record without using the accession record. So we have Jane Doe papers here. You can use letters, numbers in this field. You can also expand it if necessary. And then next required element is the identifier, which is a unique identifier to all resources in this repository. So for other repositories, they can have the same identifier, but it has to be unique to this repository. So this can be letters and numbers similar to Accession Records. And you can use all 4 fields or use just 1 field. It really depends on your institution's policy in regards to this. For us, we use all 4, but you can just use 1, and I'm just going to do it similar to the other one. So it's a manuscript collection, and it's the 101st one or something like that. It really depends on your policy at your institution. The next required element is the level of description. When you first start a new resource record, you start at the highest level, so the collection level. But if you are creating this, say for a series or anything else, and you're starting at the top because you want to separate finding aids, you have the ability to choose that level of description here. So we're going to choose collection level because we're starting at the top and working our way down. So we're going to say that this is the collection, but as you can see, you have the ability to choose file, which refers to folder, the item, if it's just one thing, series, sub-series, sub-bonds for records, subgroups for record, it's the record group itself, that kind of thing. And that's all that's required in basic information, but you do have the ability to add more. So you can choose the resource type. So is this a collection, papers, publications, records? Those are the ones to choose from. We're going to choose papers because it's a manuscript collection. You have the ability to publish the record from here, but as you go through a resource record, you have the ability to check publish in multiple different sub-records. So if you publish in one, it doesn't mean you're publishing the whole record. And even some records that you link to may have to be published outside of this record. It really depends. So when we're done creating this, I will show you how to just publish the whole thing. So, but if you want to just go through and check publish whenever you're creating it, you have the ability to do so. You have the ability to check restrictions apply. So if you check restrictions apply here, it means restrictions apply to the whole collection. As you go down levels, you also have the ability to check restrictions apply, and it means it applies to that level, that archival object, that series, that folder. So if it doesn't have restrictions for the whole collection, just for a folder or just for a series, you don't have to check it here. But if you want to make note of restrictions for the whole collections, you can do that here. Also have the ability to add a repository processing note. This is not a public note, it's for internal use. And its ability to add information about the processing or something, any other note in terms of processing. Say there's a missing folder, or something is out of order and you want to make a note here so when someone's working on the collection, they know this. You can put that in this repository processing note. And similar to all other records, you have the ability to see the tooltips whenever you scroll over anything. The next sub-record is language. Language wasn't in Accession Records, but it's in this record and in digital objects. So for language, you have the ability to add multiple languages. Say it's in English and German or English and Spanish. You can add those. You can also add a language note, giving more information about the language. Maybe a certain series is in Spanish or a certain folder. You can do that here, and you can add language to the records below this top record. So you have the ability to type ahead to search for it. The default English for some reason is old. That will be the first one that appears. So if you just keep typing, you'll get English. You have the ability to open up and just scroll. And you do have the ability to manage this list in the controlled valued list if you are a system admin. We're going to do English. Ability to add script. So what script is this language in? So for English, you would choose Latin, but you have the ability to add more, but it's not required here. It's just something you can do. And you can add multiple languages, as I said. As I talked about in Accession Record, you have the ability to add dates. The default is creation, and you can add multiple. Say you choose both dates and you want to add an inclusive date, you can. So we're going to add the inclusive date of 1900 to 1950, choose that as inclusive, and then we want to make note that the bulk of the materials are from 1930 to 1939. And we want to say that that's the bulk date. So bulk date refers to the dates for the majority of the materials in the collection. So you can add that here. If you're on the public user interface side, a bulk date will not say bulk date, it will say majority of materials found in 1930-1939 or 1932-1939. So it won't say bulk dates to researchers who are looking in your finding aids on the public side. Then the next required field or subrecord is extent. So like I talked about in Accession Records, this can refer to the whole or the part of the collection. So we're going to say it's the whole collection, and it's going to be 15 linear feet. You can again add container summary, physical details, and dimensions. The next thing that is only required for resource records is, and only appears in resource records at the top level, is the finding aid data section. So this doesn't have a lot of required information, but it does have a place for you to put that administrative information, such as who created the finding aid, the title of the finding aid, the AD information, so that encoded archival description. So if you are wanting to use a load via spreadsheet, you'll need to add an EAD ID to this, because that's how it can link to this and import correctly, or import at all really. And so you would add that here. And it would just be the same as you had in the spreadsheet, which you'll see what I mean when I go over the later. You have the ability to add the title, add the subtitle, add the filing title, how you want this to appear, and then add the date for the finding aid, add the finding aid authors. So say that the collection was processed by, or the finding aid was created by. You can add your name. You can have the ability to add description rules. So the general DAX is in here, as well as other description rules you can choose from. The only required portions of finding aid data is a language of description, and script of description. The language of description refers to the language of the finding aid and not the materials themselves. So the language subrecord up before referred to the materials. This is just referring to the finding aid. So if you write your finding aids in Spanish, you select that here. If you write them in a different language than English or anything like that, you can have the ability to choose that from this list. So you can type ahead like the other one, or you can scroll through them. Script is also required. It's not required for language of materials, but it's required for the description. So you can you will choose a script that it is written in. And then you have the ability to add a language of description note if you want to note something, like maybe it's partially written in a different language and you want to make sure, because you're only able to add one language of description, you can write that in this language of description note. You have the ability to add sponsors. So say you are processing this collection as a part of a grant. You can add that sponsor to this field here. You can add addition statement, a series statement. You can also choose finding aid status. Say that this is the start of the finding aid and you're not done, and you want to say that it's in progress, or when you are done and it's gone to your supervisor for review, or it's under review, you can choose that under revision. And if it's completed and ready to go and going to be published, you can choose completed. This status will appear in the public user interface. So if you have, so you may be asked questions if someone sees this and it says in progress or under revision, and you don't mean for that to be seen. So I just want to make people aware of that. So before you publish, check your finding aid status if there is any. And then you can just add a general finding aid note, anything about this that you want people to know, to the finding aid note field here. From there, there are no other required sub-records of a finding aid, but it doesn't mean that you can't add additional sub-records. So you can add revision statements, you can link the related accession, so we can find the Jane Doe accession record and link that here. You can link multiple. You can add an agent link if it exists. You can add subjects if you would like to. Since we're not going over those today, I won't be adding them, but you do have the ability to add them. And you can add notes. So you can add the general notes that a lot of people add to collections, like the biographical/historical note. So you would click add note, choose the note type from the list, and then have the ability to add a persistent ID, the label. So if you want this to appear a certain way, you can say that, biographical note or biography, that kind of thing. From here, you can choose whether or not this note is going to be published. So you would need to click publish here for the label and publish here for the text. So if you don't publish both, only the one that's been clicked publish will appear. And then you have the ability to add content. When you do a note, certain fields are required. So for this note, it's the type and content, and that's how it generally is for majority of notes. So you can type the biography here. Jane Doe was a professor at Test University, and continue on. Just however your institution has biographical notes, or historical notes, you would follow that and add the notes here. And then you can continue to add notes. So you can add them up here or add note down here. And you can continue to add as many as you require or see necessary. So if you want to add a rights statement but don't want to go to the rights statement subrecord to do that, you can do conditions governing use or access, either one of those. I'm forgetting which one we use, but we use one of those to add our rights statement. And then you can scroll down and you'll see that the scope and contents note. So you can add that here. Say materials contain. Collection contains. Correspondence and research materials. You'll see that it's not going to spell check. So if you are doing this, and a lot of these records, subrecords may not do spell check. It really depends on what browser and what subrecord it is. I would recommend typing your notes in like Notepad or separate document and then copy and pasting them in here, because it also doesn't really expand that well. You see that you don't have the ability to expand these. So I do recommend writing notes outside of the finding a record here. The ability to add external documents, rights statements, instances, which we'll go over once we get into the multi-level part of this, the accessions, collection management, classifications, user-defined fields. So just like Accession Records, you have the ability to add all those. When you are done adding these, you will click Save Resource, and you will have created the top level of your collection. And you can see that multiple things appear when you do that. So you'll see the buttons up here, which I'll go over once we're done creating the full resource. You have the ability to publish all, and this was the button I was referring to. So you see that there's a check boxes to publish things throughout each of these records. When you are in a resource record and you want to publish every the collection level records and its sub records, as well as the series and folders that go under it, you will click publish all and it will publish all of them. So it will check those boxes. Note that there is no unpublish all. So if you want to unpublish a part of the collection, you'll either have to go into the record and uncheck the publish boxes, or suppress the whole record if you want the whole record to not be viewed in the public side. So that is just a note about the publish all button. There is a plugin. I recommend looking into a plugin about unpublishing portions of your resource records. And with that, before I move on, I want to take questions about the single level resource record.
All right, thanks, Brittany. Yeah, we got some questions. Can your accession number and your resource identifier, can they be the same?
They can, and that's what we do. We assign collection numbers from the start of the collection's life with us, and it stays with them. So their accession number is their digital collection number is their resource number. So you can do that. It just has to be unique to all resources in the repository, but doesn't have to be unique from the accession record.
Yeah. Is there a way to export or batch identify records that have a repository processing note?
There is a, oh gosh, there is a way to export records. I don't think there's a report on this.
Yeah, sorry, I can answer that, Brittany.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, maybe Brittany knows it's a secret, but I think we know the same thing. So there isn't like out of the box report. There are some out of the box reports that come with ArchivesSpace, but they're pretty minimal because you know, people need different things. There is, if you attended the first day of the online forum on Monday, there was a session on implementing a custom reports plugin. If you missed that, the recording will be up later. So there's always the option of adding a custom report. But if you're just looking to see what like the processing status or the priority for collections, you don't instead of using the repository processing note, you could always use the processing priority status or the finding aid status, and then indicate it there. And then this is beyond the scope of this workshop, but you could always then include your processing status as a field that shows up when you search your records, and you just sort by that. So if you're looking for records with certain processing statuses, then you could sort them that way. So that's one option, but we're not going to get into that, but there are ways to get that information if that's what you're looking for. Could you please confirm that the only required information in the finding aid data section is the language and script of description, not the EAD ID and the finding aid title?
Yes, so only required ones are the finding aid language of description and the script of description. EAD ID is only not required, but only used if you use it and if you are using the load via spreadsheet.
Yeah, that it is not required, but like she just said, if you are using the load via spreadsheet tool, which is the most popular function in ArchivesSpace, you do need to make sure you have an EID because that's what it maps to, but it's not required otherwise.
Yeah.
Oh,
and if you import from EAD, it will add that field.
Yeah.
Just FYI, but we're not going over imports today. Yeah. Besides load via spreadsheet.
How does this resource record you just created relate to a finding aid? The resource record seems extensive. Does it replace the finding aid?
Resource record is the finding aid. Yeah. So that's why it's super extensive, but you use whatever fields work for you outside of the required fields. So you can make this as minimum as you want, as long as you use the required fields. So you can stop here, or you can delete the notes, whatever you decide.
Someone's asking about seeing box folder items. We're going to see that in just a minute. So I'm going to clear that question. Is it possible to migrate data from Excel tables to the ArchivesSpace software? Yes, that's the load via spreadsheet option that we're talking about. So we'll look at that a little bit later, but there is an Excel or CSV template you can use to import into ArchivesSpace. Why do we need a language and script of description again?
I have no idea why they're required. I'm very sorry that I don't know this information.
They're newly required elements in the EAD, I believe.
Okay, so yeah. There you go. EAD is why.
I can check on that though. Is there a character limit on your notes fields?
There shouldn't be. I've never run into a problem, and we have some extensive biographical notes.
Yeah, I'm not. Yeah, and if you use if your note is really extensive, or if you are using more than, I think it's 5 notes, 3 or 5 notes, the notes automatically collapse in your resource record just to make it easier for it to load. But yeah, I've never run into a character limit. I don't know if one exists somewhere and no one's ever hit it before, but there's no character limit.
Yeah, and when you have super long notes, I highly recommend typing those somewhere else and editing them somewhere else.
Yeah, yes. But always be careful of your UTF-8 characters and things like that when you're exporting.
Yeah, use Notepad.
Yeah. To clarify, the persistent ID would be a URI to include in lieu of typing in the note.
Let me go there. It might have a explanation of that. For once, we don't have a tooltip. I'm not certain about that. It creates the persistent ID, as you can see. So it's not something you would have to create. So it's not a URI.
All right. Those are all the questions that we have. If you're ready to move on and get a couple extra minutes to do multi-level description.
Yeah. So you've created your top level of the collection, so the collection level of your resource / finding aid. And you want to add your series, your files, your folders, those kind of things to your collection. So when you save, you'll see that you now have this box here. This is where your hierarchy starts. So we'll always start with the top level, so that collection, and then it will go down as you create to them. Let's see. So you have the ability to add what's known as archival objects. So any record in a resource record that is like the series or file records are generally known as archival object records. And when you create them or save them, it will say save archival object. So when you're creating the top level, it says save resource, but that language changes. So when you first want to create it, you'll go to this toolbar where you see enable reorder mode, rapid data entry, add child, and load via spreadsheet. You'll want to click on the add child to start building out your finding aid. When you do that, it will say the words new archival object, and you'll get a blank archival object record in order to start creating your hierarchy of records associated with this collection. So from here, there are not as many required elements as there was in the collection level. Really, it's level of description, title, or date. So if you add a title, you're not required to add a date. But if you add a date, you're not required to add a title because dates can act as title in archival object records. So if you're doing correspondence and you do it based on date rather than name, you can add a date as that title and it will appear as the title. So just want to make that known. You don't put the date in the title field here. You put it in the date record here, sub-record here. But those are the only two things required, some kind of title and some form of level description. So we're going to add a title here. We're going to start building a series. So we're going to do correspondence. You can add a component unique identifier, and these are only for archival objects. And people tend to use this how they see fit, but for us, we use it as a series identifier. So we'll say this is series 1, series 2, and if you use this, it will appear on the public side and indicate when you're in that record that it's series 1 or series 2, that kind of thing. You can do series A, B, Roman numerals, that kind of thing. So you have the ability to type that here. You then add level of description. So this is our series, but we can always just have files or sub-series here. It's really how your institution does it. You have the ability to publish here, but like I said, if you press publish all, it will publish this record as well as the collection record. You can add restrictions at this level. If this series is restricted and people can't actually view it, you can check restrictions apply and add a repository processing note to this series or other archival objects. If you require languages for your archival objects, so for series and files, you can add that here, similar to how you would add it to the collection level in Accession Records. If you want to add dates, so if you add dates to series, you would do that here. If correspondence is from 1935 to 1950, and it's inclusive, you would add that here and do so. So you have the ability to add extents, agent links, subjects, notes. So for us, we require a series notes, so we add scope and content and arrangement notes, and you can do that here. So I'm going to add an arrangement note just to show that here. You can publish it in here or do the publish all. So the series is arranged chronologically. And you can add as many notes as you want. When you are done creating this record, you can decide to just save it as is and go stay here, or you can click +1. +1 will open up a new archival object record, and it will be a blank record that is at the same level as this record. So in the hierarchy, it would be at the same level. So you would do +1 if you want to add another series. So we're going to click on that. So it will save this and then open another archival object. So you will see the green box saying that you created the archival object correspondence on resource Jane Doe papers. And then you'll be able to start creating another archival object record for another series. So we'll say we have research materials, and it's series 2. And the collection level description is series, and we want to click over here so we can go to the notes section and add an arrangement note for this one. So you, using this left-hand navigation, can click to various different sub-records within this collection. The series is arranged alphabetically. And then you can do another +1, or you can just save it. So we're just going to save this one. So we're going to show you other ways to do things here. So you will see that when you just save it, you stay in this record, but you'll see that it's been created and it's now called research materials rather than new archival object. So from here, you'll see that another button has appeared, and that is add sibling. So when you are in a archival, when you're on an archival object, if it's highlighted here and you have that record open, you can choose to add a child, so a record that's the next level down in the hierarchy, say the folder records, or you can add a sibling at the same hierarchical level as the one you're in. So child and sibling can be confusing, but just think of your resource record, so the Jane Doe papers, as that parent, and its children, or any records underneath it. And then they have siblings, or they have children themselves, which for series is there's file or subseries and that kind of thing. So once you've done this a while, it just becomes easier to do, and it's just clicking buttons, but it may be confusing for a minute there. So we've created the 2 series we have, and we want to go in and start adding files to these series. All right. And so we're going to go back to correspondence, and we're going to click add child. And you'll see in this hierarchy that we are now 1 level below correspondence with our new archival object. So like other archival object records, it really doesn't matter which level in the hierarchy you are. For any archival object, the requirement will be title or date as title, or the level of description. For this, we are going to have the date as title. So we're going to skip title. We won't add component unique identifier, and we're just going to choose the level of description as file. And then when we go to date, we're going to add a date as the title. So we're going to say that this is 1935 through 1936, and it's an inclusive dates, and that will act as our title for this record. So if you want to add container information, and say you add container information at the box and folder level, so file in this instance can refer to folder. So we're going to go ahead and create the container information for this. FYI, you can create container instances for accession records and resource records at any level of a resource record, and just for an overall accession record. So it does not have to be at the file level. You want to create a container instance for the whole collection, say there's 40 boxes in it, and you want to make note of that at the collection level, you can do that. but I'm going to just show you from the typical level. A lot of people do it. So you'll scroll down to instances. So you're within date and you'll just scroll down to instances. You're at the bottom. You'll see you'll have two instances to choose from, container instance and digital object. Container instance refers to the physical container that this is contained in. So it's a physical container instance rather than a digital one. That would be the digital object. We're not going to go over digital objects, as I said before. Feel free to attend the digital object workshop in June. You may hear my voice again at that one, so FYI. So you'll want to click on Add Container, and that will open a new subfield. It will have its own requirement. So what's required here is a type and the top container. So type is describes the material. So it's what kind of materials are in this container. Majority of people will choose mixed materials because it may contain documents, photographs, audio, that kind of thing. For us, our default is mixed materials, so we don't have to figure out what exactly is in every box. But you can choose audio, books, computer disks, maps, microform, various other things. So you'll click mixed materials here, and you'll go to top container. Top container refers to that physical container that houses your folders, your disks, really your microform, those kind of things. So it can be a box, it can be just a folder, it can be a drawer, that kind of thing. So that's what a top container is. So I tell students and such that when they are creating their records, the box is generally in front of them. So when you are in top container, it's that box that's sitting in front of them, and they are creating the top container for box 1 or box 2, whatever is sitting in front of them. So when you first want to create it, you will go to the drop down and you'll click create. You do have the ability to browse and type ahead for this, but we're starting to create one now. So when you're in a top container, the only requirement is the indicator. So the number for that box or the letter for that box, that kind of thing. So you do have the ability to add a container profile, which refers to the type of box and its dimensions. So say it's a Hollinger legal box, like the legal size box, and it has certain dimensions, you can add that here. It is not required, but if it is good for space management. If you want to do space management, which is a separate workshop, you'll need to know that information and have it associated with it. We're not going to go over it today, but I just want everyone to be aware. You can also do container type. So what kind of container is sitting in front of you that you are creating file records for? So is it a general box, a carton, a case, folder, a framed object, a reel, a flat file, that kind of thing. So we're going to choose box. We're going to think that this is a general box, a general archival box that a lot of us see all the time, just sitting in front of us. And we're going to say it's box 1. From here, you do have the ability to add barcodes. So if you have barcodes associated with all your boxes, you can add that number in this field. You can add the ILS holding ID, and you can add locations. I will say we're not going over locations today, but if you're doing locations, they are added to container instances, and that's how you know they're added to the top containers. So that's how you know where something is located, and that's where they're associated with. So keep that in mind and check that out in the workbook. So when you are done and you've added all the information you want to this top container, you can click create and link to top container. And you'll see a nice little box appears here. And you'll be able to view this box. And once this is saved, you'll see the associated records. You'll be able to edit it and that kind of thing. From there, since we are adding this folder to this box, we want to indicate that as a child of this top container. So we're going to choose folder from the list and add an indicator. We're going to say that this is folder 1 and box 1. You can add child container barcode. You can also add a range of numbers. So if you have the same folder title for multiple folders because the materials were too big for one folder, you can say range folder 1-4 to indicate it's in folder 1 through 4. You can also add multiple container instances. So if it goes through box 1 and box 2, you can add that by just adding another container instance. And that way you have each linked to this record, and you'll be able to see that on the public side and be able to get people to identify this is the box they want to look at when they're doing research. You can also add grandchild type. That's for anything below the folder level. Like if you want to do item, like this is folder 1 and there is, where is item? For some reason, item isn't in this list, but if there what you can add to this list. So if there's not an item and you want item and your grant in this list, you can do so through manage controlled values list. So you can say it's item 2 in folder 1, that kind of thing, if you want to go that granular for your container instances. So you would complete your container instance and then you would save it, or you can add another one so at the same level. Before I go into anything else, I know that top containers and container instances can be confusing, so I wanted to take any questions that there may be.
Can be confusing. Yeah, thanks, Brittany. All right, so we have a question about restrictions. So if you have one restricted archival object, can you not publish that record? If so, can you publish other related archival objects or resource records that aren't restricted?
Yes, so you have two options. So if you select publish all, you can go back in and unpublish, or just not publish, like just not do publish all and just continue to check the boxes, or you can suppress them. If you have the ability to suppress records, you can suppress individual archival objects and they will not be published when you select publish all. So those are those options for ones with restrictions. We do that where we suppress restricted files and just add a restrictions note to its series that it's associated with.
And if an object is restricted and you are okay with people seeing the information about the object, you just don't want them to access it, like they can't come to the reading room and look at it, you can always publish it, and then if someone uses the request button on the PUI or requests it through whatever way you manage your collections for circulation, then you can deny them separately that way. So it is possible to make the information about the record available without giving access to it as well.
You can add a restrictions note to that record itself so people are aware. They may or may not read it, but you've made them aware.
Yeah. Why did you type the dates in the expression field and not the beginning and end fields?
You can do either. Begin and end helps with searching, I will say that. So we do that as a requirement, but you either type them in begin or end that's are in expression. It's a conditional required field. I hope that explains that.
Yeah, you can do either or. If you want to search by date though, or need the dates to be machine readable for any other reason, make sure you are using beginning and end date. So the date expression field is human readable and beginning and end dates are machine readable. So I would recommend using begin and end dates, or either in conjunction with date expression or just begin and end dates. But for the purposes of a workshop, date expression is way easier.
Yes, so I apologize. We at our institution use both, so people can read it and it can be searched.
Is the top container box 1 specific to the resource being worked on, or is this a universal designation that applies to all resources? That's a good question.
It is associated with the resource that you created it in. So it's a box 1 for Jane Doe papers. However, you have the ability to link top containers from other resources to another resource, and they would be associated with both. If you have all oversized materials in one box or something like that. Don't recommend it unless you do that at your institution.
So the system does know that the box 1 you are working in is the box 1 for that specific collection, and it can tell the difference. Because obviously, we all have a lot of box 1s.
Yeah.
But frequently people do share boxes across collections, just like Brittany said, for like oversized materials and things like that. And you can share boxes as well, like she said.
I want to, we had this issue with our implementation of ArchivesSpace, and it was because we hosted ourselves. So if you host it yourself, you may have some issues appear, like a lag time when creating top containers, and you create multiple of the same top container for a resource. I would recommend waiting if you don't see it appear when you're creating the next top container instance. But you also have the ability to merge them, which we're not going to talk about today, but if you have accidentally created duplicates, you can merge them without having to like go through a lot of effort to do so.
You can merge your top containers and delete your top containers in bulk if you do make some data entry errors that way.
Yeah.
If you have artifacts that have individual barcodes that are then boxed and that box has a barcode, can you use the importer spreadsheet to capture both barcodes, or would it be better to create those archival objects manually using top container and child field?
I'm not certain that the spreadsheet has a barcode field for container instances. It's not something I've used.
I'm not sure about that either. I would say test it and see. And it also, I guess it sort of depends how many artifacts in boxes you have in your collection. Obviously, if it's a one-off or a handful, then it is easier just to do them directly in the system. But if it's tons, then you do need to find a way to do it a little bit quicker. But I would say test the spreadsheet importer. There's also some instructions, and well, Brittany will show the importer later. But right, you are.
Yes.
Okay. There, if you are a member of ArchivesSpace, there's considerable documentation in the Help Center related to the spreadsheet importer, and it gives a little bit of background about hiding fields and adding fields and that sort of stuff. You can manipulate the spreadsheet to an extent. So if you do find that there's a field that you want to add, you could potentially do that.
Yeah.
I would say look at that documentation there.
Yeah, but it is EAD, so keep that in mind.
Right. Yeah. It's not the Wild West. Speaking of EAD, Kirsten rightly corrected me that the language thing is not an EAD requirement. So I'm looking into it, and I'm just like scared to say anything, but I'm fairly confident it's just to improve compliance with ISO language codes. So thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah, I'm not certain of why. I just know that if you are, this is new as of version 2.7.1 at least. So if you're upgrading, it will kind of change languages over. It may say code for indeterminate script for the language, for the scriptive description. So just keep that in mind. You may have to edit or use some plugins to fix your languages if you're on an older version.
Yeah, and ArchivesSpace did put out a plugin to help you update those language codes if you end up updating and getting a lot of undetermined script in your record. So a way to do that a little bit quicker than having to do it by hand. And that's all the questions. I'm looking at the time. It looks like we are doing really good on time. So Brittany, you want to go ahead and do rapid data entry? Is that where we're at?
Yeah, I was going to quickly show enable reorder mode.
That sounds good. Yeah.
Goes there. Okay, so say that you've been creating your finding aid and you did something and it's out of order, like you put in a folder or you forgot about a folder and you need to add it and then put it in its right place and your intellectual description. So you can do that by enabling reorder mode. So when you click this button, it will take you out of regular editing and into reorder mode, and you have the ability to move around your archival object records and place them where they need to be. Say you create a file, that should be a series, create a series, that should be a file, you can fix that here. You have the ability to cut, which would cut the one that's selected, and then say it goes with research materials, and paste. So you can move a file that needs to be associated with another series. Say you want the research materials before correspondence, you would highlight that one, click on it, bring it up over onto the one that you want to move it to. It'll ask you if you want to add the item before, as children, or after. We're going to add it before, and that will bring research materials to above correspondence and will bring any associated children with it. And then you can also just click move here and choose to have it move down into correspondence or just move down. So if you want research materials to be a child of correspondence, you can do that. So really you have the ability to move a lot of things. You can select multiple at a time. This gets tricky when you have a very large collection. So I just want to point that out, but you do have the ability to select multiple. Really just using the control button. You cannot move the top collection level. So if you meant to create that as a series or something else, you'll have to go into that one and change its level description or change the record entirely, that kind of thing. So when you're done and you're good with how it looks, you'll just click Disable Reorder Mode and it will save that hierarchy. And you'll see it as you wanted it to be. And that is Enable Reorder Mode. Does anyone have any questions about that before we move on?
No questions in the chat. I think we are ready to learn about RDE and everyone's favorite load via spreadsheet.
Awesome. So when you are doing this, you'll want to click the level that you want to do RDE. You can do RDE at multiple levels. So if you're in a series and you want to create the files for it, you can click on that series and create the file and select rapid data entry. You can create all the series for the collection level, all the subseries, that kind of thing. So we're going to do correspondence. We're going to do correspondence and we're going to click on rapid data entry up here. And this template will appear and you will see that it is a long template. It pretty much has everything you could add. And some are required based on what it is and some are not. So if you don't want to see all of these columns, you would go up here to columns and you will unselect all the ones you don't want to fill out. So say for files, you only fill out the level description, which is required regardless. You don't want publish because you'll do that later, but you do want title, not identifier, language, script, date. You'll just continue to unselect the ones you don't want. Actually, we do want date. So I'll just unselect these just to make this easier for us. You may be asking, do I have to do this every time? You do not. You can save these as templates. So, and I'll show you that in a minute when I get done with this. You can add container instances of this, but that gets a little wonky. If you want to add container profile, you would have to edit them. So we're just going to have these basic ones. So we're going to have level description, title, expression, date. And we're going to keep it to that bare minimum for files. So say you want to save this so you don't have to do this again. You can save the template and give it a name. So I'm going to call it Brittany file records. If you save this template, other people in the implementation can use the template. That's pretty much why I put my name with it. But if you want to create templates for everyone to use, so say you want to have a dates record template or a correspondence template or file record template, you can create those and tell people to use them when using rapid data entry. That way you have the same type of information being filled out when they use these templates. So we're going to save it. And then when you want to use a template, you would just go to apply an RDE template and select the template. It's going to appear the same way here, but when you open this again, it may or may not open this template, the template you were on. It depends on the session that you're in. So you may need to go here and do that. So we're going to fill this out. If you want something to stay the same, so for the whole, all records that you are creating, you would make them blue. So if the title is the same for all of them, that would be blue, and it would mean it's sticky. So it just keeps the same information in it. We're going to make date type and label the same and level description, but keep all the others different, so we can change those. So we're going to choose a level description. Whenever something is required and doesn't have information in it, you will always see red. You'll want to validate your rows to make the red go away, or click view inline error. So it will just show it red, but it won't tell you the error that's going on. We'll add a title, correspondence, so we can add the name of the person the correspondence for. You can add the date expression, the date type, inclusive, the label, creation, then the begin and end date if you want to keep those, have those to be switched. So you've created the first one, and then you want to add multiple rows. So you can add really however many rows you want. I will say, if you do not click save rows and you just click out of this, you leave your computer, your session ends, it will not save this, and all that work you've done will be lost. So I recommend keeping this to as many numbers you can handle in the time period, like 30 minutes. So I generally do 10 to 20 at a time. That's as many as I will do in order to make sure I don't have to repeat a ton of work. So we're going to add 5 rows for this one. And when you do that, you'll see that everything that was sticky appears, but everything else is left blank. So say that's John Doe, say it's 1962. So you can continue to fill them out. If you want to fill a column, say you want to fill the begin and end dates or the expression dates, and you know it's like chronological, you can choose that column to fill it. And you can add the value. If it's just a basic same value for each, you can just do the basic. If it's a sequence, you can do a sequence, choose the column, and then add the from and to dates, or the from and to like numbers, that kind of thing. So it depends on the column you're choosing what appears in the sequence. And let's see. How many am I filling? 3. Had to do some math. And then when you do that, you can preview the sequences, and you can see that you'll have 1964, 65, 66, 67. Now it may change these expressions here, so I'll add 2 to that just in case. And then you select apply sequence or cancel. And we'll apply it, and you'll see it changed all of them. So you'll do this at the start when you've added all the rows. So now it has 1962, 63, 64, 65, and 66. And we have all that, and you can continue to add title and begin and end dates and that kind of thing. We should be able to save this now, and when you want to save, you'll just click save column, or save row, sorry. But if you want to just start again and start from the very beginning, you can just select reset, and it will reset this whole thing. So we'll save this. So it says children created, it's refreshing our page, and you will see that under correspondence, we have created files for Jane Doe correspondence, John Doe correspondence, 1964, 65, 66, and 67. So without having to go to create new records each time. So that is rapid data entry. And like I said, you can do it at different levels of your finding aid. Does anyone have any questions about rapid data entry?
Yes, Brittany. So someone asks, what is rapid data entry? So could you maybe explain why would a person elect to use this over just creating individual archival objects?
I apologize for not explaining that before. So rapid data entry is a way to create multiple records at one time without having to save and then create a new record each time. So if you know that when you are in correspondence and they are all dates, you can select the rapid data entry for that series level and just enter all the, design your template, enter all the dates associated with it, and then save it and have those records created without having to open a new record, save. So it's just a way to avoid some of the, you know, workflow. It's an easier workflow for some to do this rather than the straightforward way of doing it. I recommend it to people who are doing their series or date records and stuff like that. I hope that explains it. And I mean, this is a good option, but the next option might be better. So.
Thanks, Brittany. Could you explain why for the date label, why did you select creation and what the other options are?
Okay, so creation is generally the default, not with rapid data entry, it doesn't really default to anything. But creation just means when the materials were created, and that's why I tend to choose creation, because we're doing our dates based on what dates on the material, so that's generally what we see as when it was created. But you have the ability to choose dates for copyright, the accession, when it was digitized, when it was modified, or when it came into existence, and that kind of thing. So there are multiple dates. We tend to not use any of the others, but you have the ability for the various records to choose various date labels, and some of these are more so associated with those kind of records than they are with archival objects.
Thanks. Can you build a hierarchy within the RDE, and can you start using RDE at any point in the resource record?
No, for the first question, it's for the same level it's for the level below whatever you have selected. So you can't build a hierarchy in this, not that I know of. That would be nice, but the next option we have, the load via spreadsheet, you can. You can do it at any level, but the record that you're in has to be saved before this becomes available to you. So when you start a collection level record, like the beginning resource record, you have to save it, and then that button will be available. If you're in an archival object and you're editing it, it has to be saved before you can click the button.
Thanks. All right, we have one more question in the Q&A, and I think it is a perfect transitional question to what you're covering next. So I was waiting to see if we got any more RDE questions before we moved on, but we don't see any in the chat. So Crystal says, this looks easier than the traditional method. Do most users use this function?
No. People who come from Archivist Toolkit may use this function because it's similar to something from the Archivist Toolkit, but I have heard and seen that majority use load via spreadsheet because it's just way easier. You don't have to spend that much time in ArchivesSpace to use load via spreadsheet. And I think that's what Jessica wanted from me.
I want your honest answer, but yeah, hands down, load via spreadsheet is the most popular. So we don't have any other questions in the chat. So Brittany, whenever you're ready to move on, we're ready.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm just gonna exile this. We are going to actually search for a new record. But before I do that, I'm going to open the spreadsheet, and then I'm going to share that with you guys. You can only see my web browser right now. Okay, so just give me a second.
Brittany, while you're doing that, I'm going to drop some links into the chat for everyone. So before we move into load via spreadsheet, I'm going to drop a link to all to our migration tools and data mapping section of the website. And that includes all of our templates for importing and exporting data or importing data. And that includes this load via spreadsheet. And then I'm going to drop a second link to GitHub that includes all of the different templates that you can use to load via spreadsheet. So I'm going to drop those 2 links in the chat now.
Okay. I'm hoping you can see the spreadsheet. It is kind of small, those typing, but that's because there's a lot of fields. So let me see if I can zoom in a little more just to show you something. There we go. Okay, so this is the load via spreadsheet template that already has information in it because it's a test document. When you get the actual template, there will be nothing but this information at the top, these 3 levels. This,
Brittany,
yes.
Can you enlarge your screen any?
I can try to zoom in a little more. It is a fairly large screen. Okay, that's a little too much. Let's try 150. Is that better?
It's better.
Okay. So these 3 remain frozen on the top, these top 3 columns. You will see that one of them is basically just an explanation of what each of them is. One is instructions on how to use it. And then one is the EAD ID. So so these are the EAD fields that these are related to. So you will want to, I wouldn't hide any of this top information, you'll need it, but you can hide columns that you don't want to use. Don't delete them, hide them, because you may need them and it may mess with your import if you delete them. So I don't recommend deleting anything. I just recommend hiding them so you can go over and choose to hide them and then unhide them, but this really depends. So what you need for each of these fields is this NOAA ARC EAD here. You will need to add an EAD ID to each row of this column of this spreadsheet. So each row you fill out, you need an EAD ID for it, and it needs to be the same for each for this resource record. So it can't be different from that. You will fill in the title, add component unique identifier if you want. So if it's a series and you have one, you can add that here. And then identify the hierarchical relationship. I don't know why. Some of these have drop downs that should be appearing. Don't know why they are. And you can identify, but this one, like if it's the series and it's the top hierarchy, you would choose 1. If it's this, and then the next row is the one below it, you would choose 2. If there's ones below that, you would choose 3, and continuing all the way down. I think you can choose however many you want. I think this one has one that goes to like 11 in it. And then from there, you would choose this, there we go, this description level. So you would choose from this drop down, there's a series, files, subseries. If you choose other level, you're able to identify that here. You're able to type in true or publish, or true or false for publish. If there are restrictions, you can add that here, choose true or false. Processing notes, dates. You even have the ability to add digital objects in here, which is further down. You can add languages. Basically, everything that appears in the archival object level, such as the container instances, you can add that here. And it just keeps going. And different fields of a finding aid have different colors. So you'll see as you go through that the colors may change. And this top level here. And so when you get to container instance, and it has a container, you can choose the container instance type, like mixed materials, add the top container type, the indicator. If it has a barcode, you can add that here. You can't add the child indicator barcode though, but that is an option within, if you're doing it individually, there is a child indicator barcode now in container instances. So you do have the ability to add individual barcodes in this, but just not for the individual items themselves within the box. You can choose the child type as well as the child indicator, and you can just keep going. You can add multiple container instances. And then here is the digital objects, and one of them has one, so we can possibly see that. And then you can just add agents. So it just keeps going. It will cover everything that you need. And while you're working on a collection, you can fill this out at the same time. And that's why people like it, because it's just something you can fill out and then import in. So any questions about the spreadsheet itself before I move into loading it?
Yep, we got a couple questions. One question, this is unrelated to spreadsheet, but we can go ahead and cover it. Does ArchivesSpace allow for the truncation of repetitive files? So if you have box 2 files 3 through 19, could you do it box 2 files 3 through 19, or do you need to do box 2 file 3, box 2 file 4? And the answer is you can do either or.
Yeah. If you have a range and they have the same name, you can do 2-19 for the child indicator, that kind of thing. So you can do that. So you don't have to create a container instance for each of them if you don't want to.
Right. Another question, if we currently do not use EAD IDs, does that mean that we can't load via the spreadsheet? So as of ArchivesSpace version 2.8.1, you can use either an EAD ID or a resource URI, but it does need one or the other just so ArchivesSpace can confirm that spreadsheet is going to this resource. So you can use a resource URI if you're using ArchivesSpace version 2.8.1 or newer, which currently that's just ArchivesSpace version 2.8.1.
Yeah. Yes, it's either is fine right now. It just might be easier to just add an EAD ID if you already do them.
Do the spreadsheet columns have to conform to ArchivesSpace specifications? Yeah, so make sure you're using this template so that the system knows which fields to map to. So you do need to make sure that you're using a spreadsheet template that's compliant.
Yes. And it will tell you which row you can't edit, which is this grayed out one. Don't mess with it. Unless you know how to add EAD into this, then you're fine. Like if you know the field you want to add.
There's a couple questions I'm just going to answer in the chat. Someone asked, can columns be deleted from the template? Hide columns, don't delete. If you delete columns, you may end up impacting how and where your data imports from. So if there's columns you know you never need, just hide them, but don't delete columns.
Yeah.
You may be able to get away with deleting them, and you may not, and it's not really worth the risk, I think.
Yeah, just hide.
All right, we've got a question. Okay, someone's asking specifically about downloading or export. I think exporting out of ArchivesSpace, fixing information, adding information, and then uploading back in. I'm going to respond to that with a workflow that we call round tripping and how to do that. Yeah. I'll put that in the chat in the Q&A, so keep an eye out for that. Is everything that we typed before appears in this spreadsheet automatically? No. So use no. You answer, Brittany.
Oh, it's a blank template. You have to add the information to it. The only things that will appear are these 4 rows. Or yeah, the 5 rows here.
Yeah, so we're getting a lot of questions about like hiding rows and rearranging rows. Look in the workbook. There's a lot of documentation about managing the spreadsheet in the workbook. But if you rearrange rows or delete rows, it's very likely your data is not going to import correctly because the spreadsheet sort of depends on this order. Yeah, and so Sarah said, yeah, I'm just using the importer template and copying and pasting information from your spreadsheet. Yeah. To make it compliant. Exactly. That's a lot of what you have to do. So, all right. So yeah, let's go ahead and move on. And if you have any questions about rearranging and deleting rows, you can always test it and be prepared for for it not to work. And there is a validation tool and that you can use to check for that. But yeah, just refer to your workbook and your information about the rows.
Yes. So now that we've created the spreadsheet, which I did not create, another trainer, Noah Huffman, did. So thank you, Noah. We will now go to the top level resource record that has been created for this, because you will need to create the top level collection level in order to load via spreadsheet. So we're going to search for Noah Arc collection. We'll see that here. We're going to go into edit mode. And when we're in this, we'll see the load via spreadsheet button. You're going to click on that. You're going to say import archival objects. You can choose to only validate. If you're not ready to add all of this to the resource record, you can just validate to make sure it's working, make sure you didn't mess anything up. So that's always an option. You don't have to import it. You can just determine that you have no errors and then fix them if you do. So you can always check that if you want. We're going to choose the record from my downloads. I'm going to open it. We're going to validate just so we can see what's going on. That's going to open up a background job. So in version 2.8.1, it acts as a background job, so you can do other things while this is happening. So it opens up a new tab and you don't have to like worry about it for a second there. So once it's done, we'll see this and we'll see that it is the log for it that would be associated with a background job. You can see all the information for it. You can download a report about it, see if anything's happening with it, that kind of thing. We'll go back into resources. So we'll close to refresh this and then come back into it. We saw no errors associated with it, looked fine. So then we validated, now we're just going to import it. Oh, I gotta select my record. Open it, and then we're going to import from spreadsheet. So it's going to again open up a background job, but this time when it's done, it's not going to tell us if any errors happened. It's just going to create those records, and then when we go back to the resource record and close it, we will have all of those. It may take a minute based on the size of the spreadsheet. So just keep that in mind. And if you have other things to do in ArchivesSpace that aren't that taxing, you can work on that or just sit and wait. We're going to refresh the page. We're going to scroll down, see that all these records, all at least 11 pages of records have been created. You can click on these and see them, or you can go back to the resource, click close, give it a few seconds, and then you'll see that all these were added to it. So we have animals, mammals, and reptiles. We'll see that we have turtles. And if you continue to click on turtles, you will get turtles all the way down. And this is the one that goes to like 11. We have humans, and we have the descendants of Noah. So we have all this added to it. And if it has a digital object, which I'm not certain which one has a digital object, that will be associated here and will be included next to mixed material. Now here it is. This is a digital object. So when you click on that one, too many records, and you go to its instances, you'll see that it also has a digital object instance, and you can view that and see the links and stuff like that. We're not going over anything else to do with digital objects. I just wanted to show you that you can load those via the spreadsheet. Any questions about loading via spreadsheet?
Nothing in the chat other than a couple questions that I'm working on typing some answers to. Okay, so Ashley says, I'm not seeing the load via spreadsheet option in our instance. Does this have to do with permissions granted to users? Actually, it's likely that you're using an older version of ArchivesSpace that doesn't have this functionality. So you'll need to be using ArchivesSpace version 2.8 or newer. And what Brittany is using is ArchivesSpace version 2.8.1, and that has the validator. So especially if you want to use that validator, you want to update to ArchivesSpace 2.8.1. But if you're using anything later than 2.8, load via spreadsheet is not an option for you now directly within ArchivesSpace. Let me say that if maybe it's hard for you to get updates and your sysadmin, it's very difficult to update. There is a plugin. This was originally a plugin called the Harvard Import Tool, and you can add it as a plugin to a later version of ArchivesSpace, and it functions almost the same way, except it won't have the validator. So if you're using a later version of ArchivesSpace, you're unlikely to update anytime soon. You can just install that plugin on your older version of ArchivesSpace to get load via spreadsheet.
Yes.
All right, so it's someone saying any Excel compatible file. You need to make sure you're using the template specifically. This template is what tells ArchivesSpace which fields to map to. So that's why if you delete a field or move fields around, it disrupts the template, and then your data will come in all different places because it's no longer telling ArchivesSpace where the correct data should go. So you need to make sure you're using the template that's linked on your agenda and also in the chat.
There are other ways to import data into ArchivesSpace, and I recommend looking into that if you don't want to use this spreadsheet.
Yeah, so those migration tools and data maps that I included in the chat as well, if the spreadsheet isn't the way to go for you, there are some other ways to import data into ArchivesSpace. And then there's always the option of the API. That is well beyond the scope of this workshop. But if you want to get things done in bulk in the back end, the API is an option.
Yes.
Okay, Roxanne asked a good question. Why would you choose to use load via spreadsheet instead of just completing your resource record in ArchivesSpace?
So load via spreadsheet allows you to start entering data into a spreadsheet while you are like arranging your materials and basically processing your collection. So you're able to do that. Well, for us, we're able to do that at the same time we're working on a collection. And then when we're ready to put things in ArchivesSpace, we just have to upload a spreadsheet. It's, as you see, it's quickly done rather than just doing the traditional method of typing in a record and then saving it and then doing another one. That can take a long time. And if you have large collections, that can seem very time consuming. So it definitely saves time for large collections. If you have small ones, go ahead and do the traditional method. I'm not knocking it. I do it all the time. So feel free to use it for however you see fit, really. This is just another way to get data into ArchivesSpace.
I'll also say if you manage volunteers, interns, student workers, that kind of thing, the spreadsheet is easier sometimes for people who are unfamiliar with archival management to use. And it also means that you have fewer people actively working in your implementation of ArchivesSpace, which means fewer opportunities for data to get interfered with in ArchivesSpace. So there's a lot of different ways that the spreadsheet is useful.
Yes, yeah. That's as someone who trains everyone on ArchivesSpace, it's just nice to not have to train them on another thing and just train them on, tell them how to use a spreadsheet, which just comes easier to some students. Do we have other questions or questions about anything really? Because that was the last thing I was going to cover today.
A couple different things in the chat that I'm answering via text, but nothing open. So yeah, if you have any questions about anything covered today, please feel free to type them in now. One thing I'll say, Sarah, not Sarah, sorry, I'm getting all my questions mixed up. We had a question about downloading an existing collection, cleaning it up, or adding things and then re-uploading. I put a link there. It was April that asked that, to a workflow. Yale did a really good job describing this workflow that we call round tripping, basically to help you clean up records, exporting it as EAD, cleaning it up in Excel, and then re-importing it as EAD. I have done that so many times. It's a great workflow for data cleanup. So I put a link to that there. So please be sure to check that out. Sarah asked, for when you're validating, is there a way to like change the color of the errors? So Sarah, I'm going to drop a link into the chat or on your answer to your Q&A about if there's ever anything like that, like you're like, oh, I wish ArchivesSpace did this. We do have an open development catalog, so you can see what sort of features have been requested by the community, because this is an open source software that is developed by archivists for archivists, and we really appreciate community feedback and on feature requests and those sorts of things. So I'm going to drop a link explaining how to request a feature. So if there's ever anything that you ever wish ArchivesSpace did, that's what I'm going to drop as instructions on how to create that. Where is the workflow, the Yale workflow posted? That's in the Q&A under April's question. So in direct response to what April's asking, I've dropped that in the chat. So make sure you are keeping up with the answered questions in the Q&A. I've been dropping tons of links in there. All right. Our finding aid is a spreadsheet, so we need to copy it into the template. That is correct. You need to make sure you're using the template, because just so that everything will map into ArchivesSpace.
Yes. I will say that I was saying there was other imports. You can import accession records as CSV files if you do that for them for some reason, for whatever reason, but they don't have a template like that. You just create the CSV, and I don't think that is in our folder, but there is maybe a template out there for that kind of import too. So there's templates for pretty much everything.
Yeah, so that link that I posted for the migration tools and data maps, there's a ton of different maps that you can use to import things. And like I said, you can always do the API, but we're not doing that. And then specifically for loading via spreadsheet, there are several different templates for loading via spreadsheet, either as a CSV or as Excel. If you're using ArchivesSpace 2.8.1 or newer, these templates will work. You can do as Excel or CSV, and you can either choose to use the template with or without digital objects. So if you want to link digital objects, there are separate templates to do that. So let me go in. All right, we're getting some questions that some questions that I think are mostly for me. Are there any other questions? We did get a question about subject entry. That's not part of this presentation. So I want to make sure we answer any questions related to what we covered before we open it up to maybe more general things, if Brittany is open to doing that. But subjects are not part of what we're covering in this workshop.
I will say subjects are fairly easy to do in ArchivesSpace. So yeah, ask me questions. I'm here to help.
All right, doing too many things at once. Let's see. This presentation was recorded, and it'll be made available on the online forum wiki, as well as our Getting Started webpage and our YouTube channel. All right. Before we do that, so there's a question, how is it possible to see and get the load via spreadsheet template? So I dropped that template into the chat. So be sure you go back into the chat as well as the Q&A. I put it in both places. And then your agenda for today, that is our migration tools and data maps are also linked there on your agenda. So there's several different places you can find that. And you can always just find them on our website. Is ArchivesSpace free to download? ArchivesSpace is free to download and use, and I will drop a link directly related to this question in the chat. So ArchivesSpace is free to download and use, but it has a membership model to support the sustainability of the application. So you can download and use it. Thanks, Sarah. You're free to download and use it, but for those that elect to become ArchivesSpace members, there are certain benefits. There is access to technical support. There's access to our user manual. So I think I've mentioned several times, if you have access to the Help Center, if you're an ArchivesSpace member, you can view our Help Center, which has our user manual as well as user tutorial videos that our trainers record, including Brittany. So if you want to hear more of Brittany's voice, I definitely recommend becoming members because she does a lot of our tutorial videos. It also includes access to our member listserv. So if you're having trouble with the spreadsheet, you can always just pop on and say, why isn't the spreadsheet working? And someone knows the answer, as well as the ability to attend our member events. So in addition to this online forum, which anyone is welcome to attend, so I'm so grateful you're all here, we have several member only events throughout the year, include more in-depth workshops and cover other elements of the application. So there's that. And then there's also the ability to participate in ArchivesSpace governance. It really is a community effort, and it's archivists working and making the decision. I think I've mentioned several times in the chat, I mentioned there's a metadata subteam, there's a user documentation subteam. These are all archivists who volunteer to fill these roles and help build out this application. So there's a lot to being a member, though it is free to download and use. So I'm going to drop the Getting Started link, which is also available on your agenda, into the chat. It includes information about membership, but it also tells you how you can download ArchivesSpace. It points you to where our webinars are. It points you to our YouTube channel. So there's a lot of stuff on that Getting Started page. So I'll drop that into the chat. How can Content DM be used with ArchivesSpace, or is this too large of a question? So I would recommend, first off, let me recommend the Digital Objects workshop that Brittany will be leading. So if you want to hear Brittany and I again in June, there will be a Digital Objects workshop offered in June. You'll see more announcements about that in the future. Registration's not open yet, don't ask me. ArchivesSpace is not a content management system, so that means that digital objects or digital content is not uploaded into ArchivesSpace and it does not reside in ArchivesSpace. You can use ArchivesSpace to create metadata about those digital objects and then link them to your archival objects, your physical material. But you can't actually upload things into ArchivesSpace. So you would likely create your digital object in ArchivesSpace, and then you would take your file URI from Content DM, so the link to where that digital thing lives in Content DM, and link it within ArchivesSpace. So they would work together in that way. Do you have anything to add, Brittany?
I would say for any digital content management system, check out integrations with ArchivesSpace to see if there's an easier way to do it.
Yeah, for
people
sure.
do work on this, so definitely check out that part of ArchivesSpace website.
There is an entire integration sub-team that dedicates itself to exploring integrations. They don't write integrations or anything like that or create the integrations, but they do maintain a list of known integrations. And in addition, last year and the year before, we did a webinar series called Integrations with ArchivesSpace. So be sure to check that out on the webinar page that I linked in the wiki. And Crystal, your question, is there a Preservica connector workshop? There is a Preservica and ArchivesSpace integration, and there is a workshop, or not a workshop, there is a webinar about integrating with Preservica that was held probably over a year ago at this point. Time kind of seems meaningless. Same for Islandora. So that's another great question. If you attended Monday's online forum, there were a couple presentations about people who use both ArchivesSpace and Islandora, and specifically there was a workshop, not a workshop, there was a presentation on how University of Kansas is implementing our Islandora and ArchivesSpace together. So if you missed that, I'll have the recording up for that in a few weeks. Getting a lot of questions about specific integrations. I would say go ahead and explore our resources online about that. Check out the integrations team wiki. Visit another thing that's linked on your agenda, the awesome ArchivesSpace GitHub. That's entirely community generated resources, and sometimes people will develop integrations and post those there, so I may not even know about them. So be sure to check those out. Yeah, I think that we're caught up in the chat. I was trying to leave enough time if anyone else needed any additional information about what we covered. But we do have a few extra minutes. I'm going to drop the Getting Started link in just a second. But Brittany, did you want to show subjects for do a 3-minute demo of subjects?
I think I can do it in 3 minutes. Yeah.
Well, you can take more than 3 minutes, but I would, a really quick demo.
Yeah. So just briefly, subjects refer to the topics and index terms that you have within your collection, your accession records, those kind of things. So you create these records in order to link them to them and make them a way to search for materials through the public user interface or whatever interface you use to search your finding aids. So to create them, you would go to subject, to create menu, then subject. You will see when it appears that this is a very small record. In terms of comparing this to resource record, this will take you a minute or two to create, depending on what you're doing, compared to, a couple hours for a finding aid, depending on its length. So these are quick to do. The only required fields are the source of the subject, as well as the term and type of term. So that refers to if it's a geographical term, a topical term, and all these other things like genre, occupation, temporal, technique, style. So those cultural contexts, so similar to Library of Congress subject heading types. So for source, if you have an authority ID, say this came from the Library of Congress, and you want to add the authority ID that's associated with it in that subject heading in Library of Congress, you would add that here, but not required. No required is source. You'll see that there are multiple sources for subjects, and you are not limited to Library of Congress. It really depends on your institution and its policies and what sources it chooses to use. You can also just use yourself as a source. You can choose local sources and be like, at our institution, this is how we create subject terms, and the source is us. So you can do that. So if that is the case, you would choose local sources. You can give a scope note to basically explain the scope of this subject. And if you scroll with tooltips, it gives you examples for that. And then here you would add the term. So say we want to add a term for trying to remember what that's. We'll just make one up right now. So say we have photographs, and that type is I usually just choose topical for things, but we can choose topical with we're talking about the topic of photographs, and then you can add more. So if you add another, if you want to say it's from the 20th century, and you want to say that that's a temporal thing or it's a time thing, you can choose that. Or if it's a style/period, like you can determine the type especially if it's local sources. And then you can continue to add subdivisions. You can add external documents associated with these. If there are more, you can create multiple at a time. So save a subject and +1 to create another one, or you can just click save. When you click save, if you've had multiple terms, you will see these bars, and that's to indicate there's 2 terms. And if so, you would create separate terms for each rather than putting in the dashes that are in Library of Congress subject terms. You would just create multiple terms. And that is subject. And if you happen to have created duplicate subjects for some reason, you do have the ability to merge them using this merge function here. So yeah, I think that was enough about subjects.
For subjects, what is an external document?
No idea. We don't add them. Sorry, I can't answer that question very well. It's similar to how you would do external documents for anything else. If this is associated with Library of Congress and you want to link to that web page or URI for it, you can do that in external documents. If you have a PDF explaining your subject policy, you could add that as an external document. Yeah, so it's really up to you.
It can be anything. So is that a URL? It can be, or it could just be a file path. So I have seen people use external document for subject to link to an external resource, something as simple as a Wikipedia entry, something that provides contextual information in that way to staff. Or maybe you have some external or internal documentation about this subject, and it's stored on John's computer, then you could put as external document, check John's computer for information about this. So yes, an external document will link out to something else if it's an actionable URI, or it's just a reference to something that lives outside of ArchivesSpace. So that's especially true if you have something that is a hard copy of a thing in someone's file cabinet or on someone's computer that you don't have access to. So external document can be used as a bit of a catch-all for documentation that lives outside of ArchivesSpace that you want to know, or your staff may need to know, or a user may need to know.
Yeah. It's just there for the just in case kind of thing. And when you have created them, you can link them to resources, digital objects, and accession just under the subject sub-record of those records. I will say if you want to add a person as a subject, you do that in the agent sub-record and you don't create a subject for them. Or that is the recommendation, and that's generally how it's used within ArchivesSpace.
Yeah, so especially if you for like exporting or reporting purposes, make sure even if the person or family or corporate body is the subject of the collection, they are still an agent, and then you would give them the relator role of subject to the collection. Yeah. They are not a subject. You will save yourself a lot of cleanup if you do that, as someone who has had to do that cleanup project.
Yeah. Yeah, same.
Two-step question with regard to authority ID. If I want to use the term photography from Library of Congress, would the authority ID then be the subject heading number part of the URI or the URI?
Authority ID should be a field within the Library of Congress record. So it should just be a field that you can copy and paste in there. And then if you wanted to add the external document for like the website or whatnot, you can add that link in the location of the external document. It wouldn't be the URI for the authority ID.
With the authority ID being added and Library of Congress subject heading being specified as a source, will ArchivesSpace automatically create an active link to the entry in Library of Congress?
I do not believe so. I think it's just a reference for you. I don't even think that happens with the plugin. But
no.
Just okay. Yeah, it's just for you to use as reference.
All right, those are all the questions in the chat.
Okay, if we have more questions about things that were covered in this workshop, so nothing besides the application overview and resources and accession, and more about subjects, I can answer those.
Subjects, yeah, it's a quick one, so I'm glad that someone asked for that as a demo and not like what are digital objects. Please don't ask what are digital objects in the last 5 minutes. But if we don't have any more questions, I want to thank all of you for sticking it out. And if you are in the United States, for joining us so early. And if you are outside of the United States, some of you are joining us very late. So I appreciate everyone adapting their schedule. So Crystal, the getting started link is in answer to your other question. I went ahead and dropped it there as an answer. So go ahead and find that link there. Also, I'll put it in the chat, and don't forget to check your agenda. Your agenda at the bottom contains a ton of links, including that getting started link, the data maps link, all kinds of stuff. So make sure you hold on to that agenda, use those links at the bottom, and use your workshop workbook that is provided. That it contains so much more information that we were able to cover today. It contains some great information about using the template. So there's a lot there for you to pull on after this workshop is over. And again, one of the links at the bottom of your agenda is an evaluation. So we hope that you do complete that evaluation. This is the first time we've done a workshop this large at the online forum and offered instances and really done anything like this. So we really would appreciate your feedback so that we can improve them going forward and see what else we can do differently. So thank you all for attending, and thank you, Brittany, for doing this with Zoom issues on your end, with a thunderstorm on your end, and doing it earlier than I think we've ever done a workshop before. So I appreciate you, Brittany, being willing to do this and taking all these questions in stride.
Yeah, no problem. I hope you guys all learned a lot. And if you're not using ArchivesSpace, hopefully you will consider using it.
Great place to end. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.